The airplane cabin hummed with frustration. First-class passengers checked their watches, muttering complaints. Captain Bradford Henley stood rigid in the aisle, arms crossed, staring at 17-year-old Terrence seated in 2A. The teenager's skin was dark, his Stanford hoodie bright red. Bradford's voice cut through the tension like ice. "He doesn't fly." Flight attendants whispered frantically. No one knew that 2 weeks later, Bradford would stand before a judge, his 20-year career shattered, facing the very man whose son he'd humiliated today. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you believe everyone deserves dignity and respect, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe because what happens next will leave you speechless. Now, let's get into how one man's prejudice led to his complete downfall. Terrence Washington sat in the bustling departure lounge of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, his fingers dancing across his phone screen as he texted his mother. The 17-year-old had every reason to feel on top of the world. Just 3 months earlier, he'd received his acceptance letter from Stanford University, one of the most prestigious computer science programs in the country. His parents, Judge Harold Washington and Lorraine Washington, had raised him in a comfortable home in Atlanta's historic Cascade Heights neighborhood, where tree-lined streets and proud black families had built legacies for generations. Harold, a respected federal judge, had spent his early career as a civil rights attorney, fighting discrimination cases across Georgia. Lorraine worked as a pediatrician at Grady Memorial Hospital, dedicating her life to serving underserved communities. They'd taught Terrence to walk with his head high, to speak with confidence, to never apologize for his brilliance. Terrence adjusted his red Stanford hoodie and glanced at his boarding pass. Seat 2A. First class. His mother had insisted on it. "Baby, you deserve comfort on this long flight," she'd said that morning while packing his favorite snacks into his backpack. "You've worked so hard." The flight from Atlanta to San Francisco would take nearly 5 hours, and Lorraine wanted her son to arrive refreshed for Stanford's week-long orientation program. Terrence had initially protested about the cost, but his father had placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Son, you've earned this. Accept it with grace." Now, sitting among businesspeople and families, Terrence felt a quiet pride. He'd earned a full scholarship, scored a perfect 1600 on his SAT, and developed a mobile app that had been downloaded over 50,000 times. Stanford wasn't just a dream anymore. It was his reality. That morning's breakfast replayed in his mind. His father had made his famous pancakes, the kitchen filled with the sweet scent of maple syrup and butter. Harold had looked at his son across the table, eyes glistening slightly. "You're going to do great things, son. Remember who you are." Terrence had nodded, touched by the emotion in his father's usually stoic voice. Lorraine had hugged him tightly at the door, whispering, "Keep your head high. Don't let anyone make you feel small." At the time, Terrence had thought the words were simply maternal worry, the kind of thing mothers say when their children leave home for the first time. He hadn't understood the weight behind them, the history they carried, the painful lessons his parents had learned in their own lives. Harold and Lorraine had grown up in the South during integration, had faced discrimination that left scars even decades later. They knew the world could be cruel, even to brilliant young black men. But Terrence, raised in a generation that believed in progress, thought those struggles were mostly behind them. He was about to learn otherwise. The announcement crackled through the airport speakers. "Now boarding Sky High Airlines Flight 723 to San Francisco, all passengers." Terrence gathered his belongings, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. He joined the line, his boarding pass ready. When he reached the gate agent, a middle-aged white woman named Diane, she glanced at his ticket and then at him, her expression shifting subtly. "Is this your ticket, young man?" Her tone carried a note of skepticism that made Terrence's stomach tighten. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A. Diane examined the pass as if searching for evidence of fraud, turning it over twice. She called to a colleague. Can you verify this? The other agent scanned the barcode and nodded. It's valid. Diane handed it back reluctantly. Go ahead. Terrence felt heat rise in his cheeks. He walked down the jetway, his earlier excitement dimming. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin glowed with warm lighting. Leather seats, extra legroom, an atmosphere of luxury. But as Terrence stepped through the curtain separating first class from the main cabin, conversations paused. Heads turned. A gray-haired man in a business suit, Gerald, leaned toward his wife and muttered just loud enough for Terrence to hear, "What's he doing up here?" Terrence found his seat by the window and sat down quickly, hoping to disappear into his phone. He opened a coding tutorial, trying to focus on Python loops and functions, but his awareness of the stairs around him made concentration impossible. He could feel judgment radiating from the passengers, their silent questions hanging in the air like accusations. His heart beat faster. He texted his mother. Boarded. Taking off soon. She replied instantly with a heart emoji and the words, "So proud of you, baby." Then came the voice over the intercom, smooth and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Bradford Henley, speaking. We'll be departing shortly for San Francisco. Flight time is approximately 4 hours and 50 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." But Captain Bradford Henley wasn't relaxed. Moments later, he emerged from the cockpit, his uniform crisp and adorned with stripes indicating decades of experience. Bradford was 45 years old, with short-cropped blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that swept the cabin during his routine pre-flight walk-through. When his gaze landed on Terrence, it stopped. His brow furrowed. He approached the lead flight attendant, Jessica, a young woman with kind eyes and 10 years of service with Sky High Airlines. "Who authorized this passenger in first class?" Bradford's voice was low but sharp. Jessica glanced at Terrence, confused. "Sir, he has a valid ticket." Bradford's jaw tightened. "I need to verify this." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. In all her years flying, she'd never seen a captain question a passenger like this without cause. "Captain, is there a problem?" Bradford didn't answer her directly. Instead, he walked toward Terrence's seat, his expression cold. Bradford stopped directly in front of row 2, towering over Terrence. The teenager looked up from his phone, his brown eyes meeting Bradford's icy stare. "Son, I need to see your ID and boarding pass again." Terrence's throat went dry. "I already showed them at the gate, sir." Bradford's voice didn't soften. "Well, I'm asking again. This is my aircraft." Around them, passengers watched the exchange unfold. Some pretended not to notice, burying themselves in magazines or phones. Others stared openly, curiosity mixed with discomfort. Terrence reached into his backpack with trembling hands and pulled out his wallet. He handed over his driver's license and boarding pass. Bradford examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. "How did you afford first class?" The question landed like a slap. Terrence felt his face burn. "My mother bought it for me, sir." Bradford raised an eyebrow. "Your mother?" The disbelief in his tone was unmistakable. "Yes, sir. For my college orientation." Bradford handed the documents back slowly. "Where are you headed?" Terrence's voice came out smaller than he intended. "Stanford. I'm a freshman." Helen, a woman in her 60s seated across the aisle, finally spoke up. "Captain, is there a problem?" Bradford turned to her, his professional mask slipping back into place. "Just routine verification, ma'am. Ensuring all passengers are properly documented." But it wasn't routine. Jessica knew it. The other passengers knew it. And Terrence knew it with painful clarity. Bradford gestured to Jessica. "Call ground services. I want this ticket triple-checked." Jessica hesitated, her training warring with her conscience. Captain, I've already verified it. It's legitimate. Bradford's expression hardened. I gave you an order. Jessica pulled out her radio, her hands shaking slightly as she called the gate. Within minutes, a ground services agent appeared, a black man named Marcus who'd worked at the airport for 15 years. Marcus took one look at the scene, his experienced eyes reading the tension instantly. He scanned Terrence's boarding pass with a handheld device. Everything is in order, Captain Henley. The ticket was purchased 3 weeks ago, paid in full. No flags in the system. Bradford wasn't satisfied. His jaw worked as he stared at Terrence, then at Marcus, then back at Terrence. I want to speak with his parents. The words hung in the air, shocking in their audacity. Terrence felt something crack inside him. Sir, I'm 17. I can travel alone. I have all my documents. Bradford crossed his arms. Not on my plane without proper authorization from an adult. A businessman named Robert, seated in row 3, stood up. Captain, we're already 30 minutes delayed. The kid has a valid ticket. Can we please just go? Several other passengers murmured agreement. But Bradford didn't budge. Sir, I'll ask you to take your seat. I am the captain of this aircraft, and I will not take off until I'm satisfied that all passengers belong in their assigned seats. The implication was clear, brutal, and devastatingly personal. Terrence didn't belong. Not in first class. Not in this space. Not because of anything he'd done, but because of the color of his skin. Jessica touched Bradford's elbow gently. Captain, we need to make a decision. We have a schedule. Bradford turned to Terrence. Call your parents. Now. Terrence wanted to refuse, wanted to stand up for himself, but the weight of dozens of eyes pressed down on him. His hands shook as he unlocked his phone and dialed his mother. Lorraine answered on the first ring. Honey. What's wrong? Her mother's intuition had kicked in immediately. Terrence's voice cracked. Mom, the pilot won't let me fly. He says he needs to talk to you. There was a pause, then Lorraine's voice turned to steel. Put him on. Terrence held out the phone to Bradford, who took it with a satisfied expression. Ma'am, this is Captain Bradford Henley. I need to verify your son's ticket purchase. Lorraine's response was measured but firm. I purchased that ticket 3 weeks ago with my credit card. It's completely legitimate. What exactly is the issue, Captain? Bradford's tone remained condescending. I have concerns about unauthorized use of first-class seating by unaccompanied minors. Lorraine's voice rose. My son is 17, more than old enough to travel alone. Are you suggesting there's something wrong with his ticket? Bradford shifted his weight. I'm simply doing my job, ma'am, ensuring all passengers are properly verified. Lorraine's words cut through the phone loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Are you questioning every teenager in first class, or just my son? Because if you're singling him out, we have a very serious problem. Bradford's face reddened. I don't appreciate your tone. Lorraine shot back, and I don't appreciate you harassing my child. Let me speak to my son. Bradford thrust the phone back at Terrence. Lorraine's voice softened immediately. Baby, hold your ground. You have every right to be there. Don't let him make you feel less than. Terrence nodded even though she couldn't see him, fighting back tears. Okay, Mom. He ended the call and looked up at Bradford, trying to muster courage. But Bradford had already made his decision. He turned to Jessica. Move this passenger to economy. Jessica's eyes widened. Captain, economy is completely full. There are no available seats. Bradford's voice was flat, final. Then he doesn't fly. The cabin erupted. A black woman named Denise pulled out her phone and started recording. This is discrimination. I'm recording this. Everyone needs to see this. Bradford spun toward her. Ma'am, put that phone away immediately, or you'll be removed from this flight as well. Denise didn't lower her phone. You're targeting this boy because he's black. Admit it. Other passengers began voicing their objections, but Bradford raised his voice over them. This is my aircraft. I have final authority over who flies. If anyone has a problem with that, you're welcome to deplane. The threat silenced most of the cabin. Terrence stood up, his legs weak, and pulled his backpack from the overhead bin. Tears streamed down his face now, hot and unstoppable. He couldn't look at anyone. Jessica reached out as if to stop him, her own eyes glistening. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Terrence said nothing. He walked down the aisle toward the exit, every step an agony of shame. Behind him, Bradford returned to the cockpit without another word. The plane would take off 20 minutes later, on time. But for Terrence Washington, the world had just shown him a truth his parents had tried to prepare him for, a truth he'd naively hoped had faded into history. The gate area felt cavernous and empty after the plane departed. Terrence sat slumped in a hard plastic chair near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching aircraft taxi and take off. His Stanford hoodie, which had made him feel so proud that morning, now felt like a target. He hugged his backpack to his chest, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Around him, travelers rushed past, absorbed in their own journeys, oblivious to the teenager whose dreams had just been delayed by prejudice. His phone buzzed insistently. His mother. He answered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom. Lorraine's controlled fury vibrated through the line. Baby, where are you right now? Terrence looked around the empty gate. Still at the airport. They wouldn't let me on. Lorraine's breath hitched, and Terrence knew she was crying. His strong, unshakable mother was crying because of what had been done to her son. Listen to me carefully. Your father and I are handling this. We're going to file complaints, we're going to make noise, and that pilot will face consequences. But right now, I need to know if you're okay. Terrence wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong, but the word wouldn't come. I don't know, Mom. Everyone was staring at me. He treated me like I was a criminal. I didn't do anything wrong. Lorraine's voice broke. I know, baby. You didn't do a single thing wrong. This is on him, not you. Do you understand me? This is his hatred, his ignorance, not your failure. But sitting alone in that airport, Terrence couldn't fully believe it. Some poisonous part of his mind whispered that maybe he should have dressed differently, spoken differently, been less visibly himself. He hated that voice, but he couldn't silence it. His father's voice came on the line, strong and steady. Son, I want you to listen to me. What happened today is not your fault. That man profiled you. He discriminated against you. And he will be held accountable. Terrence wiped his eyes. How, Dad? He's a pilot. He has authority. Who's going to believe me? Harold's voice intensified. Everyone will believe you because you're telling the truth. And we have resources, connections, and most importantly, we have the law on our side. I've spent my entire career fighting injustice. I know how to do this. Lorraine added, we're booking you on another flight. You're going to Stanford today. You're not letting this stop you. Terrence shook his head even though they couldn't see. I just want to come home. Harold's tone gentled but remained firm. I understand. But son, if you come home now, he wins. He made you feel like you don't belong in that seat, on that plane, at that university. Are you going to let him be right? Something in Terrence's chest tightened and then released. His father was right. Going home meant accepting defeat, meant internalizing the message that he was less than, unworthy, suspicious. He straightened his back. Okay. I'll go. Lorraine exhaled in relief. That's my boy. We'll handle everything from here. You just focus on getting to San Francisco. After the call ended, Terrence sat for a long moment, feeling the weight of his parents' expectations, the burden of representing more than just himself. He wasn't just Terrence Washington, teenager. He was a symbol now, whether he wanted to be or not. Meanwhile, back in their Atlanta home, Harold and Lorraine sprang into action. Harold dialed a number he knew by heart, reaching Claudia Pierce, a renowned civil rights attorney with the Southern Justice Coalition. Claudia had worked alongside Harold years ago, fighting housing discrimination cases. Judge Washington, to what do I owe the pleasure? Her warm voice cooled instantly when Harold explained what had happened. That's unconscionable. Blatant racial profiling. We need to move immediately. Harold leaned forward at his desk, his judicial mind already mapping out the strategy. I want a formal complaint filed with Sky High Airlines, the FAA, and I want this documented thoroughly. If other passengers witnessed it, we need their statements. Claudia was already typing. I'll reach out to the airline today. We'll also prepare a potential lawsuit for emotional distress and civil rights violations. Judge, this is going to get media attention. Are you and your family prepared for that? Harold glanced at a photo on his desk of Terrence in his graduation gown, beaming. We're prepared. This isn't just about Terrence anymore. It's about every black child who's been made to feel like they don't belong. Lorraine, meanwhile, was on the phone with Sky High Airlines customer service, her pediatrician's calm replaced by righteous anger. After being transferred 3 times, she finally reached Patricia Moreno, a regional manager. Mrs. Washington, I am deeply sorry for your son's experience. Patricia's voice was professional but strained. Lorraine cut her off. Sorry isn't enough. Your pilot humiliated my son in front of an entire cabin of passengers. He profiled him, questioned his legitimacy, and removed him from a flight for which he had a valid, paid ticket. This is textbook discrimination. Patricia's tone became more careful. We take all complaints seriously and will be launching a full investigation into Captain Henley's actions. Lorraine pressed harder. An investigation? He should be suspended immediately. What if he does this to another child? Another family? Patricia hesitated. I understand your concern. I've already flagged this incident to our Chief of Operations. We will take appropriate action based on the findings. Lorraine's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. Appropriate action had better include termination. Because if it doesn't, you'll be hearing from our attorneys. She hung up before Patricia could respond. Unbeknownst to the Washington family, another force was already at work. Denise Howard, the passenger who had recorded the confrontation on her phone, sat in her seat as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude. She reviewed the video, her hands shaking with anger. The footage was clear. Bradford interrogating Terrence, demanding to see documents, questioning how he'd afforded the ticket, and finally declaring, he doesn't fly. Denise had been a teacher for 30 years in Atlanta's public schools. She'd seen countless bright black students face obstacles not of their own making. This video was evidence, undeniable and damning. As soon as the plane touched down in San Francisco, she posted it to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with a caption that would soon be shared thousands of times: Pilot removes black teenager from first class on Sky High Airlines flight. This is racial profiling at 30,000 feet. The boy did nothing wrong. Share this. The world needs to see. Within an hour, the video had 5,000 views. By evening, 50,000. By the next morning, over 1 million people had watched Terrence Washington's humiliation. The video spread like wildfire across the internet, igniting fury and heartbreak in equal measure. By the next afternoon, "Justice for Terrence" was trending nationwide. The footage showed everything: Bradford's hostile body language, Terrence's confusion and pain, the moment he stood up to leave with tears streaming down his face. Comment sections overflowed with outrage. "This is America in 2024. Disgusting. That pilot should be in prison. How many times does this have to happen before airlines take action?" Civil rights organizations mobilized immediately. The NAACP released a statement condemning Sky High Airlines and calling for Bradford's termination. The ACLU announced they were monitoring the situation and considering legal action. Celebrities with millions of followers shared the video. A famous actor tweeted, "This could be anyone's son. Enough is enough. Boycott Sky High until they do the right thing." An Olympic athlete posted, "I've experienced this exact treatment. It's dehumanizing. We deserve better." The media frenzy was relentless. CNN booked Judge Harold Washington for an interview. Sitting in the studio under bright lights, Harold maintained his judicial composure, but his words carried the weight of a father's anguish. The anchor leaned forward. "Judge Washington, thank you for joining us. Can you walk us through what happened to your son?" Harold nodded slowly. "My son Terrence is 17 years old. He's brilliant, kind, and was traveling alone to Stanford University for orientation. He had a first-class ticket that my wife purchased. He did everything right. He presented his documents, he was polite, he followed every rule. And yet, Captain Bradford Henley singled him out, questioned his legitimacy, forced him to call his parents as if he were a child under suspicion, and ultimately removed him from the flight. Why? Because Terrence is black. There is no other explanation." The anchor's expression was sympathetic. "What do you want to see happen now?" Harold looked directly into the camera. "I want accountability. This pilot must face consequences. Airlines must implement better training. And as a society, we need to acknowledge that this kind of discrimination is still alive and pervasive. My son is traumatized. No child should experience what he experienced." Lorraine appeared on Good Morning America the following day, her eyes red-rimmed but her voice steady. The host, a woman known for her empathetic interviews, handed Lorraine a tissue before they even began. "Mrs. Washington, I can't imagine what you and your family are going through." Lorraine took a shaky breath. "As a mother, you send your child into the world hoping they'll be safe, that they'll be judged by their character and their accomplishments. Terrence earned his place at Stanford. He worked harder than most adults I know. And to have a grown man, someone in a position of authority, treat him like a suspect, like he didn't belong there, it breaks my heart. Because I know this won't be the last time. I know my son will face this again and again. And that terrifies me." The host reached across and squeezed Lorraine's hand. "What message do you have for other parents watching?" Lorraine's voice strengthened. "Teach your children their worth. Prepare them for injustice, but also arm them with the knowledge that they deserve every opportunity. And to white parents, I'd say this: teach your children to see beyond skin color. Teach them that a black teenager in first class belongs there just as much as anyone else." Inside Sky High Airlines corporate headquarters, panic had set in. CEO Gregory Palmer called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The conference room was tense, the air thick with urgency. Gregory, a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd built his career on customer satisfaction metrics, looked around the table grimly. "We're facing a PR catastrophe. Our stock dropped 3% yesterday. Major clients are threatening to pull contracts. The NAACP is calling for a boycott. Someone tell me what we know about Captain Henley." Rita Sanchez, the Director of Human Resources, pulled up Bradford's file on the large screen. 20 years with the company. Decorated pilot. No prior formal complaints on record. But... She hesitated. Gregory's voice sharpened. But what? Rita clicked to another screen showing screenshots of social media posts. Our investigators found some troubling content on his personal Facebook posts sharing articles about crime statistics in predominantly black neighborhoods. Comments that, while not explicitly racist, suggest a pattern of bias. Gregory rubbed his temples. Why wasn't this flagged before? Rita shifted uncomfortably. His privacy settings were tight. We only found this because a friend of his shared one of the posts publicly after the incident went viral. Gregory turned to the company's chief legal counsel, a woman named Margaret Travers. What's our exposure here? Margaret didn't sugarcoat it. Significant. The Washingtons have retained Claudia Pierce, one of the best civil rights attorneys in the country. If they sue, they'll win. The video evidence alone is damning. We're looking at potential settlements in the millions, not to mention the reputational damage. Gregory made his decision. Suspend Henley immediately pending investigation. Issue a public apology. And I want a full review of our anti-discrimination training protocols. But the company's actions felt reactive, insufficient to the scale of the harm. Protesters gathered outside Sky High's headquarters in Dallas, holding signs that read, "Black lives belong everywhere," and "Fire Bradford Henley." News helicopters circled overhead. The pressure was mounting from every direction. Maurice Chin, the investigator assigned to Bradford's case, worked methodically. He interviewed Jessica, the lead flight attendant. "Tell me exactly what you observed." Jessica sat across from him in a small office, her hands clasped tightly. Captain Henley was hostile from the moment he saw Terrence. He's never questioned a passenger like that before, not in the 10 years I've worked with him. The way he spoke to that boy, it was demeaning. And when Terrence's mother called, the captain was dismissive, almost mocking. It made me sick. Maurice interviewed Marcus, the ground services agent. "Did you notice anything unusual about Captain Henley's behavior?" Marcus, who'd been in the aviation industry long enough to recognize discrimination when he saw it, nodded firmly. "Absolutely. The ticket was valid. There was zero reason to escalate the situation. But the captain insisted. It was clear to me he had a problem with that young man being in first class. And I'm speaking as someone who's experienced similar treatment myself." Maurice compiled his findings into a damning report. Bradford's own words, captured on Denise's video, were the most incriminating evidence. "How did you afford first class?" The question implied theft, fraud, illegitimacy. Combined with the social media posts and witness testimonies, the pattern was undeniable. Meanwhile, Bradford Henley was fighting back. He hired Leonard Briggs, an attorney specializing in labor disputes and pilots' rights. Leonard met with Bradford in his suburban Atlanta home, where Bradford's wife Dolores hovered anxiously in the background. "They're trying to destroy me," Bradford insisted, his face flushed. "I was doing my job. I have the right to ensure passenger safety." Leonard studied his client carefully. "Bradford, I'll be blunt. This doesn't look like a safety issue. It looks like profiling. What specifically concerned you about this passenger?" Bradford struggled to articulate an answer. "He just seemed out of place. Too young. I don't know, I had a feeling." Leonard leaned back, his expression troubled. "A feeling isn't a legal defense. And that video makes you look very bad." Bradford's frustration boiled over. "I'm being railroaded because people want to make this about race. It's not about race. It's about protocol." Leonard's tone hardened. "Then explain the social media posts. Explain why you didn't question any other young passengers. Explain why you forced him to call his parents like a criminal." "Bradford, I'll represent you, but you need to understand something. Public opinion has already convicted you. Our best hope is to mitigate the damage." Bradford turned to Fox News for a friendly platform, appearing on a prime-time show known for its conservative stance. The host, a man who'd built his career on defending controversial figures, gave Bradford room to explain himself. "Captain Henley, you've been vilified in the media. Tell us your side." Bradford sat up straight, trying to project confidence. "I did what any responsible pilot would do. I had concerns about a passenger, and I addressed them. This narrative that I'm racist is completely false. I treat every passenger the same." The host nodded sympathetically. "But critics say you singled out this young man because of his race." Bradford's jaw tightened. "That's absolutely untrue. I've flown people of all backgrounds for 20 years without incident. This is a rush to judgment." But back in the real world, the evidence against Bradford continued to mount. Maurice discovered more social media activity. Bradford had liked posts from accounts known for spreading racial stereotypes. He'd commented, "Facts don't care about feelings," under an article about racial disparities in crime that used selective statistics to paint black communities negatively. None of it was overtly hateful, but together, it painted a picture of someone with deep-seated biases. Rita presented the findings to Gregory. "We have enough for termination based on violation of company values. The question is timing." Gregory didn't hesitate. "Do it now. The longer we wait, the worse we look. Now, before we continue with what happens next, I want to hear from you. Comment number 1 if you think Captain Bradford Henley should have been fired immediately for what he did to Terrence. Like this video if you believe discrimination like this has no place in our society. And subscribe to stay updated because this story is about to take an even more shocking turn. Here's what I want you to think about. We've seen Bradford try to defend his actions, we've watched a family fight for justice, but what happens when power meets prejudice in a courtroom? Can a man like Bradford truly face consequences, or does the system protect people like him? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that notification bell, and let's get into what happened when Bradford's world started to completely unravel. 3 days after the incident, Terrence finally boarded another flight to San Francisco. This time, his mother had booked him in economy, not wanting to risk another confrontation. Terrence sat in a middle seat near the back of the plane, squeezed between a businessman and a college student. No one recognized him. No one stared. But the anonymity didn't bring comfort. Instead, Terrence felt hollowed out, like something essential had been carved from his center. Every time a flight attendant walked past, his heart raced. When the captain's voice came over the intercom for the pre-flight announcement, Terrence's hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned pale. The flight was uneventful, but Terrence couldn't relax. He kept expecting someone to challenge him, to question his right to be there. When the plane landed safely, he felt relief but not joy. Stanford's campus stretched before him in all its California beauty, palm trees swaying against a brilliant blue sky, sandstone buildings glowing in the afternoon sun. Students moved in excited clusters, parents helping with move-in day, everyone radiating optimism and possibility. Terrence dragged his suitcase through the quad toward his assigned dorm, feeling disconnected from the excitement around him. He found his room in Stern Hall and met his roommate, a cheerful white student from Oregon named Hugo. Hugo bounded over, hand extended. "Hey man, I'm Hugo. Where are you from?" Terrence shook his hand weakly. "Atlanta." Hugo's enthusiasm didn't dim. "Awesome. What's your major?" Terrence dropped his suitcase by his bed. "Computer science." Hugo's eyes lit up with recognition. "Wait, are you the guy from the video? Dude, I saw that. That was so messed up. I can't believe that pilot did that to you." Terrence's stomach sank. So much for anonymity. He turned away, starting to unpack. "I don't really want to talk about it." Hugo's face flushed. "Oh man, sorry. I didn't mean to, bring up bad stuff. But seriously, that guy's a jerk. Anyway, welcome to Stanford." He retreated to his side of the room, and an awkward silence settled between them. That evening, during a freshman orientation mixer, Terrence stood in the corner of a crowded common room, holding a cup of punch he wasn't drinking. Groups of students laughed and traded stories about their hometowns, their high schools, their summer adventures. Terrence felt like he was watching from behind glass. Then a voice cut through his isolation. "You're Terrence Washington, right?" He turned to find a young black woman with natural hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She extended her hand. "I'm Shanice. I saw your story. I'm so sorry that happened to you." Terrence shook her hand but said nothing. Shanice didn't seem deterred. "Look, I know you probably don't want to relive it, but what that pilot did matters. It's important. You're fighting for all of us." A tall young man joined them, also black, with an easy confidence. "I'm Jerome. Shanice is right. You should sue that guy into the ground." Terrence shifted uncomfortably. "My parents are handling it." Shanice leaned in. "We have a black student union here. You should come to a meeting. It helps to be around people who get it." Terrence wanted to say no, wanted to insist he just needed to focus on his studies and move on. But Jerome cut in before he could speak. "That's what they want, man. They want you to stay quiet, to just accept it and move on. But you can't let them win." Terrence felt pressure building from multiple directions. His parents wanted him to be strong, to represent something larger than himself. These students wanted him to be an activist, a symbol. But all Terrence wanted was to be a normal freshman, excited about classes and making friends and discovering who he might become. The weight of everyone's expectations felt crushing. "I'll think about it," he said finally, and excused himself. Back in his dorm room, Hugo was out, giving Terrence the privacy he desperately needed. He lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and let the memories flood back. Bradford's cold eyes. The whispers of the passengers. The humiliation of being escorted off the plane. He tried to hold it together, to be strong like his father had asked, but alone in the dark, the tears came. Hot, angry, helpless tears that soaked his pillow. He grabbed his phone and called home. Harold answered immediately. "Son, how are you?" Terrence's voice was thick. "I'm here. I'm okay, I guess." Harold heard what his son wasn't saying. "Talk to me. Really talk to me." Terrence sat up, wiping his eyes. "Everyone knows, Dad. They recognize me from the video. And they all want me to be this symbol or something, but I just wanted to be a regular student. I wanted to make friends and study and figure out my life. Instead, I'm the kid who got kicked off a plane. That's my identity now." Harold was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I understand, son. What happened to you wasn't fair. You didn't ask for this. But here's what I need you to hear, you get to decide who you are. Not that pilot. Not the media. Not even your mother and me. You. If you want to be an activist, that's your choice. If you want to focus on your studies and keep your head down, that's also your choice. But don't let shame define you. Because you did nothing wrong." Terrence absorbed his father's words, feeling some of the pressure ease. "It's hard, Dad. I keep thinking about it. Like, what if I had said something different? What if I dressed differently?" Harold's voice turned firm. "Stop. Don't do that to yourself. Terrence, you were wearing a Stanford hoodie and jeans. You were polite and respectful. You did everything right. The problem was never you. It was him. His prejudice. His fear. His ignorance. You can't contort yourself to fit into someone else's bigotry." Terrence took a shaky breath. "When will this be over?" Harold paused. "The investigation is moving forward quickly. There's going to be a hearing. You might need to testify. Are you ready for that?" Terrence didn't feel ready for anything. I don't know. Harold's voice softened. You don't have to decide right now. But son, justice takes time. And it takes courage. I know you have that courage. I see it every day. After they hung up, Terrence felt marginally better but still adrift. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams where he walked down airplane aisles that stretched into infinity, every seat filled with faces turning to stare, to judge, to find him lacking. The next morning, Terrence forced himself to attend his first computer science lecture. The auditorium was massive, filled with hundreds of eager students. The professor, a renowned researcher in artificial intelligence, began with an inspiring speech about innovation and possibility. Terrence tried to focus, to lose himself in the familiar comfort of code and logic. But his mind kept wandering. In the middle of a demonstration about machine learning algorithms, his phone buzzed. A text from his mother: the airline suspended Bradford pending investigation. It's happening, baby. Justice is coming. Terrence stared at the message. He should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, he just felt tired. After class, Shanice caught up with him. Hey, did you think about the BSU meeting? Terrence adjusted his backpack. I'm still settling in. Shanice studied him with compassionate eyes. I get it. But isolation isn't the answer. Trust me, I learned that the hard way my freshman year. She handed him a flyer with meeting times and walked away before Terrence could decline. That night, lying in bed while Hugo snored softly across the room, Terrence made a decision. He couldn't carry this alone. He couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. And maybe, just maybe, his pain could mean something if he used it to connect with others who'd felt the same sting of discrimination. He texted Shanice, I'll come to the meeting. Her response was immediate, proud of you. See you there. For the first time since boarding that ill-fated flight, Terrence felt a small flicker of something that might eventually become hope. The trauma was still there, raw and aching. But perhaps it didn't have to define him. Perhaps he could define it instead. Transform it into fuel for change, for connection, for reclaiming his own narrative. The road ahead was uncertain, but Terrence Washington was still standing. And that, for now, was enough. 1 week after Terrence's humiliation, the Federal Aviation Administration convened a formal hearing to investigate Captain Bradford Henley's conduct. The hearing took place in a sterile conference room at the FAA's regional office in Atlanta, far from the glamour of flight and the authority of the cockpit. Bradford arrived with Leonard Briggs, his attorney, dressed in his pilot's uniform as if the clothing itself might lend him legitimacy. His wife Dolores squeezed his hand at the entrance. You'll be fine, honey. Bradford forced a smile. I know. This is just a formality. But the knot in his stomach suggested otherwise. Inside, the hearing room was arranged like a scaled-down courtroom. A panel of 3 FAA officials sat at an elevated table. Chairman Arthur Pembroke, a stern man in his 70s with decades of aviation experience, Gloria Hayes, an African-American woman who'd worked her way up from air traffic controller to senior investigator, and Vernon Mitchell, a white man known for his no-nonsense approach to safety violations. Bradford took his seat, Leonard beside him, and tried to project the confidence of a man with nothing to hide. Arthur opened the proceedings. Captain Henley, this hearing is to address your removal of passenger Terrence Washington from Sky High Airlines Flight 723 on August 15. We'll hear testimony, review evidence, and determine if your actions violated FAA regulations or airline policy. Please walk us through your decision-making process on that day. Bradford cleared his throat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the day in question, during my routine pre-flight inspection, I observed a passenger in seat 2A who appeared out of place. Given my responsibility for aircraft safety and security, I requested verification of his ticket and identification. When I felt insufficient information had been provided, I exercised my authority as pilot in command to deny boarding. Gloria leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Captain Henley, what specifically made this passenger appear out of place? Bradford hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. He was very young. First-class tickets are expensive. I wanted to ensure the ticket was legitimate. Vernon interjected, his voice dry. Captain, according to records, there were 3 other passengers under age 25 in first class that day. Did you question any of them? Bradford's jaw tightened. No. Vernon pressed on. Why not? Bradford struggled to find solid ground. This situation felt different. I can't fully articulate why, but I relied on my instincts based on 20 years of experience. Gloria's eyes narrowed. Your instincts. Can you elaborate on what triggered those instincts? Bradford knew he was walking into a trap but couldn't find a way around it. The passenger's demeanor, his youth, the fact that he was traveling alone. It raised questions. Arthur interjected, were there any specific behaviors? Was he agitated? Intoxicated? Verbally abusive? Bradford shook his head. No, sir. He was polite. Gloria's voice took on an edge. So a polite, cooperative teenager with a valid ticket somehow raised sufficient concern for you to delay a flight, interrogate the passenger, force him to call his parents, and ultimately remove him. Is that correct? Leonard stood. Objection, that's a leading characterization. Arthur waved him down. Mr. Briggs, this is not a trial. We're seeking facts. Captain Henley, answer the question. Bradford straightened. I felt it was necessary given the circumstances. Gloria wasn't finished. Captain, are you aware that Terrence Washington is African American? Bradford's face flushed. I noticed, yes, but that had nothing to do with my decision. I don't see color. I see passengers. The phrase hung in the air, as hollow as it was familiar. Vernon leaned back in his chair. Captain, I've reviewed your social media activity. Would you like to discuss some of your posts? Bradford paled. That's my personal account. It has nothing to do with my professional conduct. Claudia Pierce, who'd been observing from the audience section, stood. Mr. Chairman, if I may. Arthur nodded. The family's attorney may speak. Claudia approached with the controlled energy of a predator. Captain Henley, you testified that race played no role in your decision. Yet we have evidence of social media posts where you shared articles emphasizing crime statistics in black communities, where you commented approvingly on posts questioning affirmative action, where you expressed views consistent with racial bias. How do you reconcile that with your claim of colorblindness? Leonard objected. Those posts are taken out of context. Claudia shot back, context. Here's the context. A black teenager boards a plane with a legitimate ticket, and you immediately assume something is wrong. That's not instinct. That's profiling. Bradford's voice rose. I was protecting my passengers. Claudia's tone remained icy. From what? A 17-year-old honor student on his way to Stanford. What threat did he pose? Arthur rapped his knuckles on the table. Let's maintain decorum. Miss Pierce, do you have additional evidence to present? Claudia nodded and gestured to an assistant who set up a laptop. I'd like to play the video recorded by passenger Denise Howard. The room dimmed slightly as the footage played on a large screen. Everyone watched Bradford's interaction with Terrence unfold in real time, the hostile body language, the dismissive tone, the public humiliation. When Bradford's voice echoed through the speakers, how did you afford first class? Gloria visibly winced. The video showed Terrence's tears as he gathered his belongings, the whispers of other passengers, Denise's voice declaring, this is discrimination. When the video ended, silence filled the room. Arthur looked at Bradford with an expression that had shifted from neutral to troubled. Captain Henley, watching that footage, do you stand by your actions? Bradford felt the walls closing in. I was following protocol. Vernon shook his head. There is no protocol for what we just witnessed. You humiliated that young man based on assumptions, not facts. Jessica Martinez, the lead flight attendant, was called to testify next. She entered nervously, glancing at Bradford before taking her seat. Claudia approached gently. Ms. Martinez, you were working Flight 723. Can you describe Captain Henley's behavior? Jessica took a breath. Captain Henley was unusually aggressive. In 10 years of flying, I've never seen him question a passenger so thoroughly without cause. Terrence was polite, had all his documents, and posed no threat. It felt wrong. Marcus Johnson, the ground services agent, followed. A black man in his 50s with a dignified bearing, Marcus spoke clearly. I verified Terrence Washington's ticket personally. It was completely legitimate, purchased weeks in advance. Captain Henley's insistence on escalating the situation was unwarranted and, frankly, felt racially motivated. I've been in aviation long enough to recognize when someone is being profiled. Bradford's attorney tried to poke holes in the testimony. Mr. Johnson, isn't it possible Captain Henley was simply being thorough? Marcus met Leonard's eyes steadily. No, sir. Thorough would have been checking the ticket once. This was harassment. As witness after witness testified, the case against Bradford solidified. But Bradford remained defiant. During a break, he leaned over to Leonard. They're trying to crucify me for doing my job. The union will protect me. I have seniority, a clean record. This will blow over. Leonard's expression was grim. Bradford, I don't think you're grasping the severity of this. The video is damaging. The social media posts show a pattern. And the FAA takes discrimination seriously. You could lose your license. Bradford waved him off. They won't go that far. I'll get a slap on the wrist, maybe some retraining. But I'm not losing 20 years over one incident. After the hearing adjourned for the day, Bradford drove home with Dolores. She'd sat through the entire proceeding, her face growing more drawn as the evidence mounted. Bradford, maybe you should apologize. Show some remorse. Bradford gripped the steering wheel tightly. Apologize for what? I did nothing wrong. That kid and his family are making this into something it's not. Dolores stared out the window. I watched that video, Bradford. You were cruel to that boy. Bradford's voice hardened. Don't you start. I need you on my side. Dolores said nothing more, but the silence between them was heavy with doubt. Bradford pulled into their driveway, his mind already spinning narratives to justify himself. He'd been a pilot for 2 decades, had flown millions of miles, had thousands of satisfied passengers. One complaint shouldn't define his career. But deep down, in a place he refused to examine, Bradford knew the truth. He'd seen a young black face in first class and assumed it didn't belong. He'd let his prejudices dictate his actions. And now, for the first time in his life, he might actually face consequences. That night, Bradford couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the hearing in his mind. He thought about Terrence's tears on that video, the way the teenager had tried so hard to hold it together. For a brief moment, something almost like guilt flickered in Bradford's chest. But he pushed it away. Admitting he was wrong felt impossible. So instead, Bradford clung to his anger, his sense of victimhood, convincing himself that he was the one being treated unfairly. It was easier than confronting the ugliness of his own biases. While Bradford waited for the FAA's decision, another storm was gathering, one he'd foolishly thought he'd outrun. 3 months earlier, on a warm evening in May, Bradford had attended a pilot's reunion at a bar in Marietta. He'd had too much to drink, bourbons lined up like soldiers on the counter, laughter growing louder as inhibitions faded. His friends had urged him to call a car, but Bradford had waved them off. "I'm fine. I've flown in worse conditions." The drive home had been only 10 miles, and Bradford convinced himself he could make it. He'd been wrong. On a quiet residential street, his SUV drifted into the oncoming lane and sideswiped a sedan stopped at a red light. The impact was jarring but not catastrophic. Bradford's airbag deployed, filling the cabin with chemical smoke. He sat stunned for a moment, then saw the other driver emerge from her car. She was a black woman in her 50s, wearing scrubs as if she'd just gotten off a hospital shift. Her name was Lydia Monroe. Lydia approached his window, her face etched with concern. "Sir, are you okay? Are you hurt?" Bradford rolled down his window, and the smell of bourbon wafted out. Lydia's expression shifted from concern to wariness. "Have you been drinking?" Bradford fumbled for an answer. "I had one beer earlier. I'm fine." But his slurred words betrayed him. Lydia pulled out her phone. "We need to call the police." Bradford panicked. A DUI would mean suspension, possibly the end of his career. He opened his door and stepped out unsteadily. "Ma'am, please. Let's not involve the authorities. My insurance will cover your damages." Lydia hesitated, looking at her car. The side panel was dented, the mirror shattered, but the damage was mostly cosmetic. She was exhausted from a double shift, and the thought of dealing with police reports and insurance claims felt overwhelming. Bradford pulled out his wallet, extracting a thick stack of bills. "Here's $500 cash. That should more than cover it. We can settle this right now, just between us." Lydia stared at the money. She needed it. Medical bills from her mother's recent hospitalization had drained her savings. But something about the situation felt deeply wrong. "I don't know," Lydia said slowly. Bradford pressed the cash into her hand. "Please. I'm begging you. I made a mistake. Let me make it right without ruining my life." Lydia took the money, shame and necessity warring in her chest. "Fine. But you need to get yourself home safely. Don't drive any more tonight." Bradford promised, watched her drive away, then got back in his SUV and drove home. He'd dodged a bullet, or so he thought. He never reported the accident, never filed a claim, and assumed Lydia would do the same. It was a secret buried, a sin forgotten. But when Bradford's face appeared on the news in connection with Terrence Washington's story, Lydia saw it. She was folding laundry in her living room when his photo flashed across the screen, and recognition hit her like a punch. "That's the man who hit me." She grabbed her phone and called her daughter, explaining the situation. Her daughter was appalled. "Mom, he bribed you not to report a DUI. That's obstruction of justice. You have to come forward." Lydia felt conflicted. "But I took the money. Won't I get in trouble?" Her daughter sighed. "You were in a vulnerable position. He took advantage. This man is dangerous, Mom. Look what he did to that boy. If he was drunk driving, he could have killed someone." After a sleepless night, Lydia contacted an attorney named Monica Trent, a sharp civil rights lawyer who'd made a name handling cases against powerful defendants. Monica listened to Lydia's story with growing outrage. "Mrs. Monroe, this man committed multiple crimes, DUI, hit and run, and attempting to bribe you. The fact that he's now in the news for racial discrimination shows a pattern of behavior where he believes rules don't apply to him." Lydia twisted her hands. "I should have reported it right away. I feel terrible." Monica's voice was firm but kind. "You were tired, scared, and he manipulated you. That's on him, not you. We're going to file charges. And I'm going to make sure the prosecutors and the media know about this." Within days, Monica had contacted the district attorney's office, providing Lydia's statement and the $500 in cash, which Lydia had kept separate. Traffic camera footage from that intersection was subpoenaed, showing Bradford's SUV weaving before the collision. The police opened an investigation. Early one morning, as Bradford sat in his kitchen drinking coffee and scrolling through emails from his union representatives, there was a loud knock at the door. Dolores answered, her bathrobe pulled tight. Two officers stood on the porch. "We're looking for Bradford Henley." Bradford appeared behind his wife. "I'm Bradford Henley." "What's this about?" The lead officer, Raymond, held up a document. "Mr. Henley, you're under arrest for DUI hit and run, and attempted bribery in connection with an incident on May 23. Bradford's face went white. "What? That was months ago." "It was handled." Raymond's expression was impassive. "Apparently not." "Turn around, please." Bradford looked at Dolores, who'd gone pale with shock. "Call Leonard. Call him right now." As the officers placed handcuffs on Bradford's wrists, neighbors began to appear on their porches, drawn by the commotion. Dolores stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. The officers led Bradford to their cruiser, and as they drove away, Bradford saw a news van turning onto his street. Someone had tipped off the media. By noon, the story was everywhere: pilot at center of discrimination scandal arrested for DUI hit and run. The video footage showed Bradford being led away in handcuffs, his expression a mixture of shock and rage. On social media, the reaction was swift and merciless. "He's not just a racist, he's a criminal," one tweet read. Shanice, Terrence's friend at Stanford, posted, "Justice is finally catching up. He thought he was untouchable." Sky High Airlines, already reeling from the public relations disaster, moved decisively. CEO Gregory Palmer issued a terse statement. In light of recent developments, Sky High Airlines has terminated Captain Bradford Henley's employment effective immediately. "We hold our employees to the highest standards of conduct, and Mr. Henley's actions are incompatible with our values." Even the pilots' union, which had initially pledged to support Bradford, withdrew its backing. Union Representative Walter Collins released a statement: "While we defend our members' labor rights, we cannot and will not condone illegal behavior. Mr. Henley is on his own." Bradford was held overnight and released on a $50,000 bond the next morning. Leonard met him at the jail, looking exhausted. "This is bad, Bradford. Really bad." Bradford was past denial now, replaced by raw fear. "What am I looking at?" Leonard didn't sugarcoat it. The DUI alone could mean jail time. The hit and run adds to that. The bribery charge is serious. And with all the publicity from the Terrence Washington incident, no judge is going to go easy on you. You're a symbol now of everything people hate: racism, entitlement, thinking you're above the law. Bradford slumped in his chair. "I need help. I need someone who can fix this." Leonard looked at him with something almost like pity. "Bradford, there's no fixing this. The best we can hope for is damage control." 2 weeks later, Bradford Henley found himself standing in a courtroom for his arraignment on the DUI and hit and run charges. The room was packed with journalists, activists, and curious onlookers. Bradford wore a suit, trying to look respectable, but he felt the weight of hundreds of eyes boring into him. Leonard stood beside him, briefcase in hand, as they waited for the judge to enter. A bailiff called out, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Harold Washington presiding. Bradford's head snapped up. Washington. The name hit him like a freight train. As the judge entered from his chambers, Bradford's worst fears materialized. Judge Harold Washington, a distinguished black man in his early 50s wearing judicial robes, took his seat at the bench. His expression was neutral, professional, but his eyes held the weight of a man who'd seen injustice up close and personal. Because Harold Washington was Terrence's father. Bradford felt his legs go weak. Leonard gripped his arm. "Hold it together." Bradford leaned over and hissed, "That's the kid's father. This is a setup. He can't be impartial. Leonard nodded tightly. I know. We'll file a motion to recuse. But Harold was already speaking, his voice measured and authoritative. Please be seated. Case number 4567, State of Georgia versus Bradford Henley. Mr. Henley, you are charged with driving under the influence, hit and run, and attempted bribery. How do you plead? Bradford's mouth was dry. He could barely force the words out. Not guilty, Your Honor. Harold made a note. The court acknowledges your plea. Bail has been posted. We'll schedule a pre-trial conference. Defense counsel, do you have any motions at this time? Leonard stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, defense moves to recuse due to potential bias. Your son, Terrence Washington, was involved in an incident with my client in August. We believe that creates an appearance of impropriety and makes it impossible for you to be impartial. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Harold raised a hand for silence. Mr. Briggs, I understand your concern. However, the incident involving my son is not the subject of this proceeding. These are criminal charges related to a May traffic incident involving Ms. Lydia Monroe. My son is not a party to this case. I am fully capable of presiding over these proceedings impartially. Leonard pressed on. Your Honor, with all due respect, the publicity surrounding both incidents is significant. The public might perceive bias. Harold's gaze hardened. Mr. Briggs, are you suggesting I'm incapable of upholding my oath because of my personal feelings? Leonard backtracked slightly. No, Your Honor, but the optics. Harold cut him off. This court is not concerned with optics. It is concerned with the law. Your motion to recuse is denied. Mr. Henley will receive a fair trial based on the evidence, nothing more, nothing less. Bradford couldn't contain himself. He stood abruptly. This is unfair. You're going to railroad me because of what happened with your son. The courtroom gasped. Harold's expression didn't change, but his voice took on a steely edge. Mr. Henley, you will sit down and address the court properly, or I will hold you in contempt. Your attorney will speak for you. Bradford sat, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. Harold continued, his tone now ice-cold. Let me make something abundantly clear. In this courtroom, I am not a father. I am a judge. You will be judged based on the facts of your case, the evidence presented, and the applicable law. If you are convicted, it will be because a jury of your peers found you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, not because of any personal vendetta. Do you understand? Bradford nodded mutely. The arraignment concluded quickly after that, with a trial date set for 6 weeks later. As Bradford left the courtroom, reporters swarmed him. Microphones were shoved in his face. Captain Henley, do you think Judge Washington can be fair? Bradford pushed through the crowd. No comment. Another reporter shouted, do you regret what you did to Terrence Washington? Bradford snapped, unable to contain his frustration any longer. I did nothing wrong. Leave me alone. The outburst was captured on camera and would play on a loop across news channels for the rest of the day. Back in his chambers, Harold removed his robe and sat heavily in his leather chair. The walls were lined with law books and framed photos, including one of Terrence in his Stanford hoodie, smiling broadly. Harold stared at that photo for a long moment. His wife Lorraine called, her voice anxious. How did it go? Harold sighed. He tried to get me recused. I denied it. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Can you really be objective, Harold? Harold's response was thoughtful. I have to be. That's what the law requires. But Lorraine, this man thinks he can act without consequences. He thinks his privilege will protect him. I'm going to make sure the law is applied fairly and fully. Not because he hurt Terrence, but because he broke the law. There's a difference. Lorraine's voice softened. I trust you. But this can't be easy. Harold looked again at his son's photo. It's not. Every time I see Bradford Henley, I think about Terrence crying on that plane. I think about the fear in his voice when he called us. But I also think about all the other black kids who've been profiled, humiliated, treated as suspects just for existing. This case is bigger than Terrence. It's about whether people like Bradford Henley can continue to operate with impunity. Lorraine understood. Just take care of yourself, baby. Harold promised he would, but after hanging up, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He put his head in his hands and took several deep breaths. Being impartial didn't mean being unaffected. It meant controlling his emotions, channeling them into a commitment to justice rather than revenge. And Harold Washington had spent his entire career fighting for justice. He wouldn't stop now. Meanwhile, Bradford sat in Leonard's office, his world crumbling around him. He's going to destroy me, Bradford said, his voice hollow. Leonard leaned back in his chair. Maybe. Or maybe he'll surprise you. Judges like Washington take their oaths seriously. But Bradford, you need to understand something. Even if he's fair, the evidence against you is overwhelming. The traffic cam footage, Lydia Monroe's testimony, the cash you gave her, your blood alcohol level estimated from the timeline. You're going to be convicted. Bradford stared at his hands. I've lost everything. My job. My reputation. Dolores is barely speaking to me. And now I'm going to prison. Leonard didn't offer false comfort. Probably. The question is for how long. 6 weeks later, Bradford Henley's trial began. The prosecution presented a devastating case. Traffic camera footage showed his SUV weaving dangerously before the collision. Expert testimony established that based on the timeline and Bradford's behavior, his blood alcohol content had been well above the legal limit. Lydia Monroe took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted the accident and Bradford's attempt to bribe her into silence. He handed me $500 and begged me not to call the police. I took the money because I was desperate, but I knew it was wrong. The defense tried to argue that Bradford had made an error in judgment but wasn't a habitual offender. Leonard painted him as a dedicated pilot who'd had one bad night and made a series of poor decisions. But the jury wasn't buying it. The evidence was too clear, the pattern of behavior too troubling. After 3 days of testimony and just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood. On the count of driving under the influence, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of hit and run, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of attempted bribery, we find the defendant guilty. Bradford's face crumpled. Dolores, sitting behind him, sobbed into her hands. The courtroom buzzed with reactions. Harold sat impassively at the bench, his expression revealing nothing. Mr. Henley, please stand for sentencing. Bradford rose on shaky legs. Harold looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Henley, this court has heard extensive testimony about your actions on May 23rd. The evidence is clear, you drove while intoxicated, endangered lives, caused property damage, and then attempted to evade responsibility by bribing the victim. These are not the actions of a man who respects the law or the safety of others. As a commercial pilot, you held a position of great responsibility. People trusted you with their lives every time they boarded your aircraft. Yet you demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and a belief that rules do not apply to you. Harold paused, letting the words sink in. This court must consider not only the crimes you committed, but also the broader context of your behavior. While the incident involving my son is not part of these proceedings, it speaks to a pattern where you believe your authority places you above accountability. Bradford's attorney stood. Your Honor, I must object to the mention of. Harold cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Briggs, I am providing context for sentencing, which is within my discretion. Sit down. Leonard sat. Harold continued. Mr. Henley, the law is clear about the penalties for your crimes. But beyond the legal consequences, I want you to understand something. You had every advantage in life. Education. A prestigious career. Respect. And you squandered it through arrogance and prejudice. You hurt people, both physically and emotionally, and you did so believing there would be no consequences. Today, you learn otherwise. Harold adjusted his glasses. It is the judgment of this court that you are sentenced to 18 months in the Georgia Department of Corrections, followed by 3 years of probation. You will complete 200 hours of community service upon release. You will attend mandatory substance abuse counseling. Your pilot's license is permanently revoked by order of the FAA. And you will pay full restitution to Ms. Lydia Monroe in the amount of $7,500 for vehicle repairs and emotional distress. The gavel came down with finality. Bradford was led away by court officers, his hands cuffed, his face a mask of devastation. Dolores watched her husband disappear through a side door, her heart breaking for the man she'd married and the stranger he'd revealed himself to be. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Lydia Monroe, who'd come to witness the sentencing. Ms. Monroe, how do you feel about the verdict? Lydia took a breath. I feel like justice was served. What Captain Henley did to me was wrong. What he did to that young boy was wrong. I hope he uses his time in prison to reflect and change. That's all I can hope for. Across the country at Stanford, Terrence watched the news coverage in his dorm room. Hugo sat beside him. They got him. Are you happy? Terrence considered the question. I'm not happy. But I'm relieved. It means what happened to me mattered. It means people believed me. He texted his father, "Thank you for everything, Dad. I love you." Harold, still in his chambers, read the message and felt tears prick his eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. He texted back, "Love you too, son. Always." 3 months later, Terrence stood before a room full of students at a black student union meeting. It was his first time sharing his story publicly in his own words. "What happened to me on that plane was one of the worst moments of my life," he began, his voice stronger than it had been in August. "I felt humiliated, powerless, like I didn't matter. Captain Henley saw a black teenager in first class and assumed I didn't belong. He made me feel like my achievements, my dreams, my humanity were invisible." The room was silent, everyone hanging on his words. But here's what I learned. Staying silent doesn't protect you. It just lets injustice continue. So I spoke up. My parents fought for me. And slowly, painfully, justice came. Shanice, sitting in the front row, smiled encouragingly. Terrence continued. "I'm not saying everything is fixed. Racism didn't end because one pilot got punished. But it mattered. It showed that accountability is possible. And it taught me that my voice has power." After the meeting, several students approached Terrence, sharing their own experiences with discrimination, thanking him for his courage. Terrence realized that his pain had created connection, had helped others feel less alone. That was something. Terrence also began volunteering at a community center in East Palo Alto, teaching coding to underprivileged kids, many of them Black and Latino. One Saturday afternoon, a 10-year-old girl named Aisha asked him, "Mr. Terrence, can someone like me really be a computer scientist?" Terrence knelt down to her level. "Aisha, you can be anything you want. Don't let anyone tell you different. Not teachers, not strangers, not anyone. You belong in every space you enter. Remember that." Aisha nodded solemnly, and Terrence saw in her eyes the same doubt he'd felt on that plane, the same question of worth. He made a silent promise to help kids like her see their own value. 6 months after Bradford's sentencing, Terrence returned home to Atlanta for spring break. His family gathered around the dinner table, the house filled with the comforting smells of his mother's cooking. Lorraine had made all of Terrence's favorites. Fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, cornbread. They ate and laughed, and for the first time in months, the weight of the ordeal lifted slightly. After dinner, Terrence and his father took a walk through the neighborhood, the evening air warm and fragrant with blooming magnolias. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Terrence said. Harold nodded. "Always." Terrence hesitated. "When you were sentencing Bradford, were you tempted to be harsher because of what he did to me?" Harold was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't angry. Every time I looked at him, I thought about you. But Terrence, the law isn't about revenge. It's about justice. I gave him the sentence I would have given anyone with his crimes and his lack of remorse. Not more, not less." Terrence absorbed this. "I'm glad it's over." Harold stopped walking and turned to face his son. "It's not over, not really. You'll face discrimination again. Maybe not as blatant, but it's still there. What matters is how you respond. You stood up for yourself. You let people fight for you. And you turned your pain into something meaningful. That's what I'm most proud of." Terrence felt his throat tighten. "I learned from the best." They embraced there on the sidewalk, father and son, two generations connected by struggle and resilience. As they walked back to the house, Terrence felt something shift inside him. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. The hurt hadn't fully healed. But alongside those feelings was something else, strength. He'd been tested in a way he'd never imagined, broken down and humiliated. But he'd survived. More than that, he'd grown. He understood now what his parents had been trying to teach him all along: the world could be cruel, but he had the power to fight back, to demand better, to refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Bradford Henley had tried to make Terrence feel small, unworthy, out of place. But in the end, it was Bradford who'd lost everything. His career, his freedom, his reputation, all gone. And Terrence? He was still standing. Still dreaming. Still fighting. The fight was far from over. Racism wouldn't disappear because one man faced consequences. But for Terrence Washington, this victory mattered. It proved that even when the odds seemed insurmountable, justice was possible. And that knowledge, hard-won and painful, would carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. So what do you think about Terrence's journey? Have you ever experienced discrimination or witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of who they are? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. If this story moved you, hit that like button to show your support for Terrence and every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories about real courage, real injustice, and real change. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because these conversations matter. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for believing that justice is worth fighting for. Remember, you belong everywhere you have the courage to stand. Until next time, keep your head high and never let anyone make you feel small. Peace and respect to all of you. This story reveals profound truths about discrimination, accountability, and resilience that resonate far beyond one airplane cabin. First, prejudice operates through assumptions, not evidence. Bradford Henley didn't see a teenager with a valid ticket heading to Stanford. He saw skin color and made judgments that had nothing to do with reality. This reminds us that bias often masquerades as instinct or protocol when it's really just learned prejudice. Second, silence protects injustice. If Terrence had stayed quiet, if his parents hadn't fought back, if Denise hadn't recorded that video, Bradford would have continued his behavior unchecked. Speaking up is uncomfortable and sometimes painful, but it's essential for change. Third, accountability matters. Bradford faced real consequences not just for discriminating against Terrence, but for his pattern of lawlessness. Justice isn't automatic, but when people demand it persistently, systems can respond. Fourth, trauma doesn't define us unless we let it. Terrence could have let that humiliation break him, but instead he transformed his pain into purpose, helping other young people find their voices. Finally, privilege blinds people to their own wrongdoing. Bradford genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong because he'd never had to face consequences before. This story teaches us that real equality requires dismantling that unearned immunity and building systems where everyone, regardless of position or race, answers to the same standards of decency and law. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed racial profiling or been treated differently because of your background? What would you have done in Terrence's situation? Drop a comment below and let's start a real conversation about how we can all stand up against discrimination. If you believe everyone deserves respect and dignity regardless of their skin color, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories about courage, justice, and people fighting for what's right. And please, share this video with your friends, your family, on your social media because stories like Terrence's need to be heard. The more people who understand what racism looks like in real life, the more we can work together to end it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching, for caring, and for being part of the solution. Remember, change starts with awareness, and awareness starts with stories like this. Stay strong, stand up for what's right, and never stop believing that your voice matters. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight. Peace, love, and justice to all of you.